ambulance answers an emergency call as a young woman collapses.
Riverside General, go ahead.
This is 256. We're coming out to your facility, code 3.
256 is Riverside General, copy all information. We'll notify respiratory and we'll have a bed set up for you inside here. We'll see you inside 3 to 5 minutes. Riverside General, sir, 256.
Gloria Ramirez, a 31-year-old mother of 2, is suffering from acute breathing difficulties.
I want you to take slow, deep breaths. I'm going to listen to you breathe now, okay?
The events of this night would trigger one of the world's most bizarre medical mysteries. The terrifying possibility that the human body could create a substance as toxic as a nerve gas. The Riverside incident would become a global news event.
564.
The attempts to find out what happened to Gloria Ramirez would involve experiments which seem to stretch the laws of chemistry and medical science. It would lead to the involvement of one of America's most secret research laboratories and the development of a revolutionary scientific theory.
Came to me with a radio call saying that a lady was coming in ventricular tachycardia, which is unstable, lethal heart rhythm, and she had a history of terminal cancer, and that the paramedics would be here in about 5 minutes.
The night that I was with Gloria Ramirez, she was brought to the emergency room. She was in distress, difficulty breathing, and having trouble with her cardiac status.
Gloria Ramirez had advanced cervical cancer, which had spread to her lymph system.
I had given her some medication called lidocaine, and it momentarily converted her heart to a normal heart rhythm, but shortly after that it went back into the same irregular rhythm.
A strange sheen was observed on the patient's skin.
How are you feeling?
Her blood pressure went a little bit, had dropped a bit, and had caused her to become a little more lethargic, a little not completely unconscious, but her mental status was changing because her brain obviously wasn't being perfused. So at that time, you have to get a little more aggressive.
Okay, she's in VFib. Let's charge the 200 joules and get ready to defibrillate her. Okay, everybody clear? Still in it, VFib, continue CPR.
She was treated with medications, and we began to draw blood to send blood to the lab to find out what might be wrong.
Okay, let's get an IV placed and send some blood for CBC, tox screen, electrolytes.
It appeared as if the drawing of the blood from Gloria Ramirez's arm triggered an extraordinary chain of events.
And that's when a lot of things happened. A lot of bad things happened.
She's still in sinus rhythm. Blood pressure is 90 over 50.
I had smelled an odor that smelled similar to ammonia, and I made a comment as such. It smells like ammonia in here. And I felt not dizzy, but I felt funny in the head. The nurse that was drawing the blood had said that it smells like it's coming from where she was standing, referring that it was coming from the blood. And as she stood up, I could see her eyes kind of flickering, and my physician to the right, as well as myself, had noticed that she was going to collapse. Then I also looked at the syringe and saw they're about half a centimeter spiculated granule-like precipitate, and had made a comment that there's crystals in her blood.
What happened was the nurse began to draw blood and speak of an odor and say it again, and then a third time say it again, at which time she didn't look like she felt very well and then passed out. Someone said, "Oh, Julie's gone down. That's the doctor." And she was down, and I don't know what was occurring with her. And then as I was finishing taping the IV in place, I didn't feel good. And I just only told somebody, "I don't feel good." And they said, "Something, get her out of here." And when they were getting me out of there, I was gone.
Then I started getting, well, I already had the symptoms, but my muscle contractures had begun. Those were really painful. I had double vision at that time, had difficulty breathing, and I just remember being moved to another trauma room, and I don't know the time frame, but eventually everybody in the ER was out in the parking lot, and things continued from there.
I knew it was nighttime. That I did know, that it was nighttime, because it was cold and it was dark. And I didn't want my family woke up to be told that something bad had happened.
That night, patients and doctors were evacuated. In total, more than 20 people were afflicted. Their symptoms ranged from nausea and fainting to severe breathing difficulties. At least 5 were taken to hospital.
It was a pretty chaotic, fearful, scary night. Apparently once Dr. Ochoa had kind of recognized that a lot of people were getting sick, not just 1, 2, or 3. Apparently 20-something people got sick from different severities. He had, at that time, decided to evacuate the entire emergency room.
There was pandemonium at Riverside General Hospital last Saturday night after a medical team was overcome by fumes which rose from the blood of a dying patient. Ironically, the hospital, which specializes in emergencies, needed paramedics to place an emergency call on its behalf.
There are a lot of people running around trying to provide a service to everyone there. Because I could hear in the background, I could hear my own workers. You know, people I work with who do my job, trying to get what they needed.
Anything else they need?
We got plenty of O2.
An amber bag, roll out an amber bag and 3 monitors. Put the amber bag right away.
I was coming in and out of consciousness pretty often. I did hear a lot of people screaming and crying. It did sound pretty chaotic to myself. People screaming, another nurse is down, another doctor is sick, this person isn't breathing, stuff like that.
Dr. Julie Gorczynski and nurse Maureen Welch were rushed to outlying hospitals for emergency treatment.
The symptoms were gross inability to breathe, and another nurse was having an ability to breathe and was screaming at me, "Breathe," and the paramedic slapping me in the face, telling me, "Breathe, I don't want you to code here," or something like that.
Back in the ER room, Gloria Ramirez died at 10 to 9. Outside, the parking lot began to resemble a war zone. The authorities declared a state of emergency. Amongst the first to arrive on the scene was a special unit of the Riverside Fire Department known as Hazmat. Their task was to test for hazardous materials and toxic fumes to discover what had caused the bizarre symptoms of the emergency room workers.
It was just totally chaotic. People were scared to death. Even Parkview, that had accepted myself and another nurse, they were scared. They didn't know what to expect. And as I found out again later, that the intensive care unit nurse that was looking after me and the other nurse, she got sick. So I don't blame them. They didn't know what happened to me. As far as they knew, I still could have made other people sick. So it was a really fearful, mysterious case, not just to Riverside County Hospital, but to all of the outlying hospitals that had to accept these people that were sick, me included.
Dr. Julie Gorczynski was horrified by what seemed to be happening inside her own body.
The gal that was drawing my blood, she couldn't get the blood out. I'm thinking that's unusual. She tries again. She's, pulling back on the syringe. She's like, can't get any blood out. And then she kind of like just plays with the needle, kind of like spins it around. And all of a sudden she gets, a couple cc's or so of blood. And she's looking at the syringe, and she looks and she sees, like little flakes, little particulate matter. And she's never seen this before, and she showed it to me. She's like, look what's in your blood. Does this look like the crystals you saw in the ER? They were, the same yellowish, beige color. They were spiculated. And that's when I'm like, oh my God, whatever was in Gloria's blood is in my blood. And that's when the first time I was really scared.
Now the search began for what had caused the mysterious illness. Yet the hazmat team were unable to find any trace of toxic chemicals inside the hospital. Wearing airtight biosafety suits to protect against possible contamination, the investigators now focused on the body of Gloria Ramirez. The extraordinary suspicion was that somehow her body had become toxic and had knocked out the team trying to save her life.
Construction began 2 days ago on a special airtight dome within the coroner's building. This is where the autopsy will be performed. The dome will be lined in plastic with all heating and air conditioning ducts sealed.
The fear was that Gloria Ramirez's body was riddled with toxins and that whatever had felled the ER personnel could still be lingering inside her. The bizarre nature of the incident guaranteed a media circus. The autopsy took place at 1 o'clock in the morning on February the 25th, 6 days after the incident.
The day that Gloria Ramirez was brought to our facility, she was placed in our refrigeration unit until the day of the autopsy. This area here is where the autopsy actually took place. We were able to build a wooden type cabinet area with very strong exhaust fans that would try to take away any type of fumes, any type of thing away from Dr. Detroit and myself.
It's straight out of science fiction. Doctors donning airtight suits to perform an autopsy of Gloria Ramirez. Days earlier, her dying body seemed to emit fumes that overcame nearly 24 emergency room workers, hospitalizing 5.
The suits that we wore were very cumbersome. Basically, they were level 2 suits from the Riverside Hazmat Fire Department. Once you had the respirator on, we had direct air lines from outside to our respirator. The lines were probably about 75 to 100 feet away from us. At that time, when you breathe in, the suits kind of blow up with the air. And we're in kind of an enclosed situation when we were doing the autopsy. Plus, we did not remove Gloria from the protective type unit that she was in. And we were concerned about the sharp points on this metal type container that she was in. So we didn't want to actually cut our clothing or their protective suits and so forth. So at that time, we were very, very, very careful in what we were doing. The autopsy was probably one of the most extraordinary autopsies in the whole world, and probably there's never been one done like it before or even to this day.
Taking samples of tissue and dissecting vital organs such as the brain and the liver, the doctors searched for anything that could have caused Gloria's body to become toxic. Specimens were sent to over 20 laboratories.
We completed the autopsy, placed the remains back into our holding facility. At that time, we had to go to detoxification through the hazmat where they scrubbed us down, probably about another 20, 30 minutes to do that. Now it's like 4:15 in the morning. It's about, 32, 34 degrees outside, and then they hose us down with cold water. After that, they transported Dr. Detroit and I to a local hospital here, which we were under observation for 12 hours.
Despite the drama and mystery surrounding the autopsy, no evidence emerged from the corpse to explain the mysterious illness inside the ER room. Nothing out of the ordinary was found in any of the samples. The coroner reported that Gloria had died from natural causes, the result of advanced cancer and kidney failure. 1 week after it happened, the mystery of the ER room remained unsolved. But with 5 people still in hospital, the search for answers continued.
The autopsy was successfully concluded at approximately 2:35 this morning. The participants reported no physical symptoms stemming from today's procedure.
Although nothing emerged from the autopsy, Dr. Gorczynski was still suffering from a mystery illness.
Originally, when I woke up, obviously I had the difficulty breathing, which was the first symptom. I had double vision, which was kind of interesting. I had the severe muscle, whatever you want to call them, contractures, tremors that were primarily, they were whole body, but they were more vigorous in the upper part of my body, and they were involuntary, and they're extremely painful.
From the beginning, I've had trouble with my hearing, profound trouble with my hearing, and profound trouble with something known as aphasia, which is a form of memory loss associated with speech. And it was very profound when it happened, and it's continued.
The first glimmer of an explanation came from blood tests of the medical staff. The analysis revealed a reduction in the levels of an enzyme known as cholinesterase. The lowering of this enzyme is a standard indicator of exposure to pesticides.
The evidence we have is the patients had low levels of enzymes which suggest organophosphates. People don't get low level of that enzymes without any reason. There has to be some explanation. Organophosphate is the explanation.
Riverside, 60 miles from Los Angeles, had recently been sprayed with a pesticide known as malathion. This formed the basis for the first explanation of the Riverside mystery. The suggestion was that Gloria Ramirez had driven through an area of pesticide spraying and might have become dangerously contaminated. Malathion is used throughout the state to combat the spread of fruit fly and protect the billion-dollar interests of California's agricultural economy. The malathion spraying program has aroused controversy and anxiety over the potential health risk to the general public. Yet even those who have campaigned against the use of pesticides are not convinced that malathion is the answer.
0.25% or less is what's being used in the formulations that are being sprayed in Los Angeles. So it would have to be a significant concentration. Her clothes would have had to be drenched with it, or she would have had to have worn some clothing that was contaminated for a long period of time, not taken a shower or something like that. It would have to have been an unusual overexposure situation.
Another potential source of exposure lay inside the hospital itself. It emerged that just a few days before the incident, the ER room had also been sprayed with a pesticide, Durspan, used to kill insects and cockroaches.
What I would have expected if Durspan or chlorpyrifos was responsible for that, well then you would expect the amounts in the air to be the greatest, the exposure would be the greatest, the closest in time to application. Yet for 4 days nobody complained of anything, there weren't any problems. So it's very hard for me to believe that all of a sudden on the 5th day that these tremendous symptoms would be coming from that application when we have no evidence of anything unusual happening in the 4 days prior.
One critical question is whether the victim's symptoms match those produced by pesticide poisoning. Dr. Gorczynski now suffers from osteonecrosis, which restricts the supply of blood to her knees. This is not a recognized symptom.
It's very possible that the problem with her knees was a consequence of the treatment she got for the toxic exposure. In other words, it may have been an indirect effect of the toxin rather than a direct effect. She clearly was the sickest. She had changes in her cardiovascular system. She had changes in her circulation. And the pancreatitis is known to cause osteonecrosis. Steroids are known to cause osteonecrosis. So she has things that occurred that could explain the bone problems, but she wouldn't have had those things had she not been exposed to the organophosphates in the first place.
One further mystery which indicated a possible exposure to organophosphates was reports of an ammonia-like smell and a strange yellow substance in the ER room. But it was flushed away before it could be properly investigated.
the emergency room doctor, Dr. Ochoa, never told the hazmat captain in charge that he had flushed down some yellow substance in a hopper immediately next to the patient, and that things happened right at that point. Never told the hazmat captain that there's a syringe in there that might show what occurred, and that syringe has mysteriously disappeared after several weeks of questioning of the officials who said, oh, we have everything accounted for, and they finally have to admit they destroyed it. Okay. So that's that kind of handling, and always pointing at the patient. That's the worst part of this. There's one person who cannot speak for herself, and that's Gloria Ramirez.
Part of the current legal battle is a complaint about the way Gloria was treated. It's now alleged that the hospital was negligent in its care and that unnecessary suffering was inflicted on her relatives by the county's refusal to release the body for several weeks after her death.
We can't properly grieve. I don't think we'll ever get over something like this. This is traumatic.
All we want now is for her body to be released so that we can, have our closure with her and put her to rest. And it gets difficult because we haven't had that time yet. And that's all we're asking for now, is just to release her body.
Meanwhile, an exhaustive official investigation was underway. The hospital was searched and tested, and doctors examined the victims. On September the 2nd, the state of California finally released their report. They found no evidence of pesticides or anything else that was toxic. They concluded that the outbreak of symptoms in the ER room was due to a sociogenic illness, mass hysteria. Mass hysteria is a collection of physical symptoms caused by psychological stress. It afflicts several people simultaneously. The state report concluded that the features of the Riverside incident matched those of mass hysteria. These were the absence of laboratory results and physical findings confirming a specific organic cause, the apparent transmission of symptoms by visual or auditory cues, and crucially, a preponderance of illness in females.
Oh, that was hogwash. I mean, I've never been a hysterical person. That was just ridiculous. It was unfounded. It was insulting, because it's still ridiculous.
Many remained unconvinced by the mass hysteria solution. The Riverside incident quickly fell victim to vested interests and lawsuits, as Gloria's family and members of the ER staff began to sue the hospital and the state. A different agenda had emerged. Then, 3 months after the mass hysteria report, there appeared a radical new scientific theory. It was the work of the prestigious Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in California. Their forensic department had been one of the laboratories that had analyzed blood samples from the autopsy. Livermore is one of America's most closely guarded government scientific centers. During the Cold War, it was the headquarters for the highly classified development of thermonuclear warheads and the futuristic laser technology of the Star Wars program. Now, 2 of their nuclear chemists who had followed the case from the beginning began to take a closer interest after they were contacted by Maureen Welch.
I need to know what chemical I was exposed to so I could be treated for the long-term effects that might come out, neurologic especially. And therefore, I called the key guy's name on the paperwork and called him up and said, "Hello, are you Brian Andresen?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And I said, "You don't know who I am, but my name's Maureen Welch." And he says, "I most certainly do know who you are. You're the respiratory therapist that took care of Gloria Ramirez." And I told him, "Do you know anything about the night that surrounds the labs you ran?" And he said, "No, I don't." I sent him every written report and every news clipping and every written thing I could think of to write down that happened that night. And 3 months later, he and his partner formulated a great theory.
The Livermore theory was centered on the radical notion that the human metabolism could transform a common home remedy into a toxic war gas. Dimethyl sulfoxide, DMSO, is used by millions in America and Britain. It's an unofficial home remedy which is popular amongst athletes and bodybuilders to soothe sprained muscles. It is possible that Gloria was using it as a painkiller.
If it's true that she was taking DMSO, there is a variety of home remedies that people rub it on them for pain. It kills pain. You can rub it onto a joint to get rid of arthritic pain. You may be able to rub it on a tissue injury to get rid of pain. Also, if you mix a chemical with it and put it on your skin, it goes right through the membranes and you can see it in the body fluids.
Livermore suggested that as the DMSO passed through her skin and into her bloodstream, it combined with the oxygen that she received in the ambulance. This turned the DMSO in her bloodstream into dimethyl sulfone, DMSO2, at this stage a harmless byproduct. As more oxygen was administered in the ER room at Riverside Hospital, it combined with the dimethyl sulfone to produce a reaction inside her body which had never been seen before. Finally, when the blood was drawn, the change in temperature allowed the blood to become toxic by producing dimethyl sulfate, DMSO4, which has the properties of a chemical warfare agent.
All we have proposed is a potential scenario for the incident, and the suggestion goes as follows. Ramirez likely had an appreciable quantity of DMSO in her blood the night of the incident when the ambulance arrived. It was converted to DMSO2, perhaps as a result of the oxygenation she received both in the ambulance and in the emergency room. We're proposing then that the DMSO2 then further oxidized to a substance called dimethyl sulfate, or DMSO4. This particular substance can be found in the literature on chemical warfare agents and is significantly toxic in very small amounts. And so we're speculating and postulating that the crystals that were observed in the blood was excess dimethyl sulfone that, by virtue of it being drawn into the cooler environment of the ER, caused this precipitation effect.
The theory from the world-renowned laboratory was at the frontiers of science and was eagerly seized upon as the answer to the mystery.
The nation's top scientific lab now says cancer patient Gloria Ramirez had a potent chemical in her blood. At a briefing today, county coroner officials presented a report from the Lawrence Livermore lab detailing a bizarre chemical reaction that could explain the mystery fumes.
A certain chemical reaction occurred within her body, and at a date and time of February 19, 1994, in the emergency room, a chemical process occurred that transformed this compound into a deadly toxic substance.
Yet elsewhere, the Livermore theory was greeted with disbelief. Dr. Stanley Jacob has pioneered the use of DMSO since the 1950s. A long-time advocate of its medicinal properties, he rejects the theory that it could become toxic within the body.
Okay. Thank you very much. I know that DMSO has side effects, but I myself take this every day. I give it to every member of my family. I treat patients who come to the medical school in my clinic. If I thought for 1 minute there was any credence in this hypothesis, I would back away. I certainly wouldn't be drinking it every day myself.
Across America, most scientists greeted the Livermore theory with derision. The more it was studied, the less sense it made.
In my particular view, the possibility of the human body undergoing a self-destructive mechanism seems very unlikely. The body is, in fact, designed to do just the opposite, to detoxify things. Certainly there is not an impossible scenario by which one could imagine some volatile material being produced, but I certainly don't have any idea of what it would be.
The Livermore scientists claim that what makes this possible is the unknown physiology of the dying body.
I'm led to believe that knowledge of conventional types of enzymes might not be all that applicable in this particular case. I understand that when a person is dying, that a number of unconventional species and reactants are highly possible and even probable.
So what they are saying is, yes, in the laboratory, the oxidation of DMSO2 to DMSO4 may be unknown or inefficient, but the correct enzyme at the right place in the right time could make this happen. I think that that's a hard problem to argue away because we don't know all the roles of all the enzymes in the body. But in general, when there is a chemical process that takes place under enzymatic control, there is usually a corresponding chemical process that we can mimic in the laboratory.
If the Lawrence Livermore theory is correct, it's tantamount to a breakthrough in the science of chemistry, and today they are still claiming this is possible. Equinox will attempt to recreate for the first time the extraordinary chemistry which may have taken place in Gloria's body. In London, Equinox asked Imperial College to carry out a series of unique experiments in a safe laboratory environment. The aim? To test the Livermore theory that a human body could become toxic by creating dimethyl sulfate.
One of the problems with the Lawrence Livermore proposal is that dimethyl sulfate reacts with blood rather rapidly. The half-life in blood is about 23 seconds. We're going to demonstrate that in a simple way here by reacting dimethyl sulfate with water, which actually reacts rather slower than blood, but we will see here the process by which dimethyl sulfate gets transformed by water. Here we have water containing an indicator, dimethyl sulfate in the funnel above. I'll release dimethyl sulfate into the water. As I do so, the products of the reaction of dimethyl sulfate and water will change the indicator from purple to yellow.
One of the first objections is that DMSO4 reacts very quickly with the blood.
If dimethyl sulfate were to be made in the blood, and that is very questionable, it would have such a short residence time in the blood before it was destroyed that it wouldn't have time to be released into the atmosphere in any significant amount and therefore create the effect that it's supposed to have created.
The theory that we've proposed has any DMSO4 that was generated in vivo within Ms. Ramirez at 37 degrees C fall apart by a hydrolysis reaction into relatively benign species. It's only when the DMSO4 might be formed in vitro, say in the cooler environs of the emergency room, that it has a chance of persisting and perhaps volatilizing to affect the ER staff.
Well, you would have had to have someone have amounts of dimethyl sulfoxide in their blood system that would be impossibly large. You would have to have a chemical reaction occur in the blood that is unknown. It is unknown both in the laboratory and is unknown as far as I've been able to find out in metabolic systems. And you'd have to somehow get this material to fill an entire room of people, which is probably reasonably well ventilated, and do this over a sufficiently long period of time that they would be affected in the way they were.
I do not believe, on the basis of everything that I have learned in organic chemistry over the last 25 or 30 years, that the oxidation of DMSO2 to DMSO4 occurs under physiological conditions in the human body.
I think it is closer to the frontiers of science fiction. The reactions as described in the report that I've seen are perhaps reactions that might occur in interstellar space. Dimethyl sulfone is a very stable molecule. I have personally used it as a solvent for reactions at temperatures well above 200 degrees centigrade. That's above 300 degrees Fahrenheit. This molecule is stable under those conditions. It is stable in air. You can heat it for a long time. Nothing happens to it.
The lack of a precedence for a conversion of DMSO2 to DMSO4, at least in my thinking, is not completely compelling. Science is, after all, a progression of new discoveries, and it might be that under certain unique conditions that new chemistry is possible.
There was further controversy over the Livermore theory when the coroner released it without their permission as the official explanation for the Riverside incident.
When the Riverside coroner decided to release our report, even though it was an in strict confidence preliminary draft, the indication I got was that the scientists had been out of the loop for a very long time and that the lawyers were calling all the shots at that stage.
The coroner's release of this hypothetical report 6 days before his municipal election for re-election, when he was in a tough battle for re-election, is absolutely despicable. He was told in the Livermore report, do not release this. This is a hypothetical theory only, this DMSO. It's not to be released. It's just for some working paper to think about.
Under pressure to give the public a credible solution, the coroner had endorsed the Livermore theory without it being subjected to normal scientific scrutiny. Today, the case has moved on from the realm of scientific theory to the infinitely more debatable world of legalistic argument. At stake, potential awards of millions of dollars, with attorneys desperately searching for the solution which will most benefit their client.
Well, it's a 7-figure case in my view, but I don't know exactly the dollars. We're working hard right now just collecting the evidence and battling through the case. And believe me, they're going to battle all the way through with us.
Despite widespread skepticism, the possibility remains that Gloria Ramirez could have become toxic. This experiment is the first attempt to replicate the chemical process of combining blood with oxygen and DMSO in the laboratory to determine whether this could produce the toxic chemical DMSO4.
What we're going to try and simulate here is the effect of hyperoxygenation of the blood in the presence of dimethyl sulfoxide, DMSO. There's about 30 milliliters of blood. We'll add to that about 10 milliliters of DMSO, and we'll pass oxygen through this solution in a crude attempt to simulate the hyperoxygenation of the blood upon oxygen administration to the patient. What we're trying to do is to transform the dimethyl sulfoxide that I added earlier into either dimethyl sulfone or dimethyl sulfate, if indeed that can happen, and later on we will analyze this to see if we've achieved this transformation. This has now been running for half an hour, which is sufficient time to complete the experiment. So what we'll do, we need to collect some of the blood now. That's sufficient for our analysis.
Using a highly sophisticated chemical detector, we analyze the blood sample to see whether there might be any trace of DMSO4. The gas chromatograph mass spectrometer is so sensitive that it can detect the presence of DMSO4 or its intermediate in parts per million. It was a similar machine which the Livermore scientists had used to detect DMSO inside Gloria's blood.
Okay, this is the trace we obtained for the sample extracted from the blood. We see that only one peak has come out with mass 78 for DMSO, and that there are no other peaks. We expected to see perhaps a mixture of dimethyl sulfoxide present in excess, and then some dimethyl sulfone and perhaps some dimethyl sulfate. However, we've only found dimethyl sulfoxide, which disproves the theory that mixing oxygen, blood and dimethyl sulfoxide gives dimethyl sulfate.
Although our experiment failed to create DMSO4, it is still possible that the complex chemistry of the dying body could produce new and unusual reactions. In the end, it may be impossible to disprove the theory conclusively. Ironically, the one theory that was attacked the most is the one which remains the most plausible: mass hysteria.
This is really the first outbreak that I studied, and what happened was that a group of school children were rehearsing a school play that marked the end of the year, and in the middle of the rehearsal, one of the kids fell and cut his chin. And after that, another kid got sick, and there was a wave of illness. Well, we're seeing a lot of the children who are excited and anxious and tearful and concerned about what's going on. It's typical in these kinds of outbreaks that the school officials will actually bring the affected children together, which seems to make these episodes even worse because the kids who are at risk observe the other sick kids, and the at-risk kids begin developing symptoms.
It was very hot, very musty. They fainted on the stage, one after another. Then a generalized panic took place. Firemen were called, and the panicky reaction spread to the rest of the children, and to a great extent to some of the personnel that came to aid them, the adults. Everything's fine. It's just a big mass hysteria, domino effect.
Eventually, 40 or 50 kids were hospitalized, but the illness outbreak ended within hours.
Although not representing their conclusions, Dr. Small's case studies were cited by the state to support the mass hysteria explanation.
If you look at these outbreaks that have psychological causes, you see some characteristic features. Women are affected more often than men. The symptoms tend to be short-lived, but often you can see them last sometimes for months. There is psychological or physical stress or both. The symptoms can recur in the original setting of the outbreak. Generally, there is hyperventilation and fainting, and the constellation of kinds of symptoms that people experience are quite similar among outbreaks.
If I'm a stressful person, do you think I'd be working in the emergency department? I don't think so. Every emergency physician, not in the United States, but in the entire world, has to be a non-hysterical type A person. Otherwise, before they ever become stressed out, they're going to get an ulcer. So that doesn't fit my personality, nor does it fit any other emergency physician personality. Wasn't stressed out, wasn't hot. I'm a woman. Okay, I kind of find that insulting because that's chauvinistic. Some guys can also fall to hysterical things. So by definition, the only thing I fit is being a female.
Professional women are not immune. There have been some notable cases that have involved professionals. For example, in your hometown in London, the Royal Free Hospital was shut down for 4 months because of an outbreak of a polio-like illness that turned out to be most likely mass hysteria, and this was in the 1950s.
Just 1 month after the Riverside mystery, another incident occurred in Bakersfield, California, which bore an uncanny resemblance to what happened to Gloria Ramirez. This new incident was seized upon both by those who believed the cause to be pesticides and those who believed in mass hysteria. Once again, it involved an ER room, a critically ill woman, and a hazmat team.
Behind me, workers in airtight suits are decontaminating the trauma room. That's where the 2 medical personnel were performing emergency services on the 44-year-old woman, and they began to feel dizzy and nauseous.
There was a reported case of mass hysteria in emergency room personnel in Bakersfield, California, a year or so ago, and all the people reacted just like they did in this case, and they had all the same symptoms and signs, just like in the Riverside fumes case.
It was just after 11 o'clock Saturday night when city and county hazmat crews arrived on scene to investigate the mysterious fumes.
In fact, in that Bakersfield case, a patient had overdosed on insecticide. She had taken organophosphates. She had showed up in the emergency room with a stomach full of organophosphates, and when they pumped her stomach and drew blood from her, the emergency room personnel became ill from the organophosphate insecticide, and it was a well-documented case of organophosphate exposure, not mass hysteria.
Yet if an organophosphate did cause the reactions at Riverside, it remains elusive. Significantly, recent studies have shown that mass hysteria is often triggered by a strange odor.
Recently, we studied an outbreak in a local school system that was triggered by an odor. The kids smelled this odor. The school actually is near a refinery, so they're used to these different odors, but that particular morning it was a little stronger than usual, and there was an outbreak that we concluded was mass hysteria. And when we looked at different features that predicted who would get the symptoms or who wouldn't, one important feature was how strong the odor was. The kids who smelled the odor more strongly were more likely to get the symptoms.
The problem with the mass hysteria theory is that it's very difficult, if not impossible, to prove scientifically. Dr. Julie Gorczynski rejects it out of hand, not least because of the enduring nature of her symptoms. Although her condition has now improved, she has been ill for much of the last year.
I'm absolutely worried about my health. To this day, I'm worried about my health. I had 5 knee surgeries on my knees. Been in a wheelchair 6-8 months, on crutches up to 10 months. I can't do any sports because of my muscles in my knees. I still have headaches. I still have my nightmares. I have bone marrow changes. I don't know if that's early cancer now or what. I'm worried. At that time, I didn't know if I was going to live or die. And these people are, it seems like to me that they're either covering something up or playing politics, and they don't care about my health. And that really offends me.
We may never find out scientifically what caused it, but somebody is definitely going to make an attempt to find out legally what caused it. And I think that those are two different things. You know, scientific proof, whatever that means, and legalistic proof are two different things. And I think that that's what's going on right now.
As the different vested interests prepare to battle it out in court, the possibility of an untainted scientific verdict recedes ever further into the distance.
You know, quite frankly, if it was mass hysteria, then it seals the case against the county on behalf of Gloria Ramirez's children, because it indicates that she was not given the proper care.
For the Riverside County Health Authority, it's the Lawrence Livermore theory that provides the dream scenario in regard to their liability and the claims of negligence against them.
The county loves the theory because, A, they can blame Gloria Ramirez, and B, they can say, hey, don't blame us. You know, it's not anything we did. But it's just, you know, when I took the deposition of the person, Lawrence Livermore, one of the co-authors of that study, it was quite clear that this did not make sense chemically, and it was, I guess the term voodoo science has been used, and that's probably an insult to the voodoo followers.
The Gloria Ramirez case remains a unique challenge for both science and medicine. Yet the necessity for science to seek answers has now been superseded by the interests of the lawyers and their clients. What happened in the emergency room has dramatic implications beyond the ruined lives of those who were affected. But until the legal battles are over, it's unlikely that the case will be brought back to the more impartial court of scientific opinion, where it might finally be solved.
We're about to discover a secret 5 billion years old. The secret of a planet 1,300 times larger than Earth. A world so enormous it could swallow every planet and moon in the solar system. A violent world of hydrogen gas with a heart of molten metal, we are about to discover the secret of the king of planets. On Jupiter, next Sunday at 7, Channel 4.